Hello, friends, and welcome to the 100th episode of Worldbuild with us. My name is Rob Hilferty. I am here with the whole gang today. We've got one Mr. Daniel Quinn, one Mr. Christopher Prunty, and even the elusive Courtney Staples. Today's episode is going to be pretty chill, actually. So if you're here mostly for the hardcore world building, you might want to skip ahead in this episode because the first chunk of it is going to be answering questions from our patrons that we had over on Discord. That leads me into my shilling opportunity, which is, hey, we've got a Discord. We've got an email address where you can send us world building prompts where we build them live on air. You can email us over at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com. You can also follow us over on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild, and you can give us money on Patreon, all that good stuff in the description. And if you want to join our Discord and ask us questions there, you can do so. Link for that also in the description. Let's fucking get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have our 100th episode of World Build with Us. I can assure you that when we started this podcast roughly 2 years ago, I was happy that I would get to episode 10, and now I'm at 10 times that. We have roughly 50 to 70 hours of content on the internet. We've interviewed all sorts of interesting and cool people, from game designers to authors to YouTube personalities. We've got a lot of stuff under our belt. It's been one hell of a journey, and I am just so grateful for everyone who listens and everyone who supports our community and supports the podcast. So yeah, that is where my spiel ends, and I get to let everyone else talk. Everyone talk about the podcast in some way.
Like, I was not the kind of person that would have considered being on a podcast because I don't like public speaking or being seen by humans.
Same.
Yeah, so I feel like this is a different experience for us, and hanging out with Chris and Rob has made that easier because they're cool people. And
oh wow, just leaving me out of it.
It's a little heartfelt. The only sentimentality you'll get out of me.
Yeah. Daniel, obviously a late addition, and Courtney even later than that.
Mm-hmm.
The real trick to running a podcast successfully, and I'll say this in two things. One, you have to have consistency. As soon as you let one episode go, I feel like, especially without notice or something like that, that is the death of the podcast. That's where most podcasts end, is when they stop scheduling or they miss a week, and then all of a sudden it's 2 weeks, and then it's on unexpected hiatus. And the one thing that I'm very, very proud of in this podcast is our ability to produce week after week of hot content for you. And
not safe for work.
Well, no, I don't think any of our episodes are actually safe for work, because man, we are foul-mouthed motherfuckers. But still, it's been a lot of fun to produce this amount of content with my friends. Also, number two, number one with successful podcasting, scheduling and like the logistical stuff is boring, but it's also the most vital part. Number two, and I bring this up because it's also very important, trick your friends into coming on podcasts and then snag them into staying as co-hosts for like another 70 plus episodes, because that's how Daniel ended up. And I'm sure I can say the same thing once we get into another 50 episode with Courtney around. So
we got you, Courtney.
Yes.
Damn it.
Exactly. You're all stuck with me now. So yeah. Does anyone else have anything to say about the podcast? Chris, you're an OG host like me.
I mean, it's, without saying anything more, it's been fun. I like where it's gone. I like the kind of exercises, and every now and then just kind of thinking about world building more than I guess I would have before, or at least in a more variance than I would have before, instead of like one track of, I'm going to think about the apocalypse for 3 solid months.
Yeah, well, only 3 during the pandemic's actually pretty good, Chris.
Yeah, it's
I gotta
impressive,
say,
actually.
like, that's not bad at all.
I didn't want escapism to become my real life.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll echo that sentiment as well. I think that the podcast has really made me more creative and has like made me not just a better in terms of like my own creativity, but I feel like it's really improved my ability to collaborate with other people. Like I think that the best thing that I've gotten out of doing this podcast is my ability to like link ideas, like disparate ideas, to make something more cohesive. And I think that's a skill that's been like really strengthened just by the exercises that we do on a weekly basis for the podcast. Like, okay, Chris's idea makes no fucking sense in the world. How do we make it fit? You know, we're like, Daniel always fucking throws a curveball. How can I expect and even subvert that expectation that I know is coming? You know, stuff like that. Courtney, you haven't been with us enough for you to have your own archetype of like what kind of dumb bullshit you're going to be throwing into the world building process. But I look forward to actually, if anything, and this is just a Courtney thing in general, not like or whatever, but it's like Courtney will always take the concept and be like, how can we make it darker than that already? You know, like that's the Courtney archetype of
That's
world building in general.
yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
but
we need
I've
to
really
get
enjoyed especially the random world building exercises that we've done, like the full jams where we don't come in with anything prepared and we just go for it.
Mm.
I do think that's really sort of expanded my scope of world building, as you had said before. I tend to veer towards like the more realistic types of stuff, but getting more into like, oh, there's like actually Satan in this world, or
Yeah.
yeah, there's robots who trap people inside of them, that sort of stuff. That's like
Oh, that
not
was
what I would normally
speaking
go
of a
for.
dark one. I think that one was
Mm,
actually my fault. Although you
yeah,
went a step even further with it, so I can blame you for that at least.
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think what's also important about this kind of podcast is having a bunch of people together, trying to get to a solution based on serendipity. So like given a premise and then kind of coming up with things as you go. I think in itself is like a representative of the creative process you go through when you're trying to solve a problem in
Mhm.
fantasy. Because when you're making something in fantasy, you're not just spitballing and tying things together in any old way, even though it is fantasy. Because in speculative fiction, like there's an internal logic to things, right? So things make sense in the setting you put together and based on all the little building blocks you started to build up. So when one person says something, another person says something, you've got to start squaring that. And like
Oh
Rob
yeah.
was saying, it means like negotiating with everyone
Mm-hmm.
to make that make sense.
Yes.
And so I feel like oftentimes people who don't understand speculative fiction or don't read a lot about it, they don't realize that there is a logic behind all of this. Like even though the rules are not the ones we're familiar with, like there are rules and we're trying to
Yeah.
make them make sense. We just have to make the rules up. That's the trick.
Yeah. And honestly, I think when it comes to good world building, the thing that I always pay attention to is what makes sense, or does this idea make sense? And if it doesn't, how can I make it make sense? Because realistically, once you create an element that really takes people out of it entirely, uh just like it has to have its own internal logic within the world itself. That's what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
And
Right.
you can really come up with whatever you want, even if the logic is like loose at best. Like that doesn't matter. What matters is, okay, in this world this happens, how and why does it happen? And then if the answer just so happens to be Satan, or if it's like, you know, food is magical, those are the answers. And then you, okay, this is the element that you're dropping in. Oftentimes I think good world building comes down to implications that are sometimes left on the table or not really explored fully. Yeah, so I think that we've said enough about our podcast and our, you know, world building experience that we can really move into the questions sent by our patrons over on Discord. And again, got to link or got to plug that Discord because man, it's super cool. Gluax has a couple of, you know, kind of personal questions, which we're going to ask, which is, how did the crew meet? And what was your favorite tabletop or what was your first tabletop RPG played together? The how did the crew meet one is actually, it's simple. It's like how every friend meets, but it's also a little bit more complicated, I think. I met Courtney because of a mutual friend of ours, and then Chris. I met Chris through Courtney, and I met Daniel through another mutual friend of ours, if I can say that. And I think that's like the really basic level.
Yeah.
There's like a little bit more narrative to it than that, but I don't think that people need to know, the dirty laundry aspect unless you guys are comfortable saying it.
We're all members of a sex cult.
Yeah, basically, that's true.
God damn it, Chris. All right, fine. That's If you want to toss it out there, that's actually why we started gaming together, is that the sex cult met every other Thursday, and we needed something to do in the the off Thursdays, and so
it was convenient.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. And then, mind you, this is not like some any Kmart employee can fucking come and join the sex cult. No, we had to
Kmart employee.
We had to offer headshots. We had to offer headshots, and we have to like fill out the survey. Oh yeah.
I feel like Kmart is like somehow worse than Walmart, because it's just like Walmart we know is the worst, right? Like just metaphysically the worst, but somehow Kmart is just bottom of the barrel sad. And I say this with my mother having worked at Kmart for decades.
Have you ever gone to a Kmart as it's going out of business? It's
right.
just sad.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like walking through those aisles and they're empty and barren. They're like, no one gives a fuck. It's one of the most depressing things. Yeah, absolutely.
Literal despair.
I only mentioned Kmart because I'm literally staring at a copy of Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage, which is like straight up Kmart realism. So
beautiful. Kmart realism, that should be a fucking genre.
It is a genre. Why do you think I fucking brought it up?
Kmart realism.
Yeah, Kmart realism is already a genre. It's mostly focuses on like really poor people who would shop at Kmart. Yeah, that's exactly
that's beautiful.
Right. It's great. It's actually really interesting literary genre that.
Oh wow, it is actually a genre with a Wikipedia article on it.
No, I'm not bullshitting you.
It has a Wikipedia article.
You fucks! I have an English degree. I've got to have useless information somehow.
I thought this was just a term that you coined.
No.
I mean,
wait
a minute. Who published the Wikipedia article?
We notice a Rob H. It's weird. Updated 10 minutes ago.
Strange.
Stop trying to make Kmart fiction happen.
No, Kmart realism is an actual thing, and it's been a thing. It's a subgenre of literary fiction. Like I said, I have an English degree. You fucks, I deserved it. Anyway, the first tabletop RPG that we all played together. Courtney and I played 3.5 D&D like, oh God, probably 15, 20 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Now. Yeah, we're old.
Not 20. I think it was 15.
It's probably closer to 15.
Yeah, 15.
Well, hold on. 15 would have been...
Don't do the sad math.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Chris. We should skip that.
Don't do it. The sad math makes you say that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Chris, Courtney, and I played... 3.5 or Pathfinder together?
I think Pathfinder.
The first?
Yeah. I forget. No, I think we might have started with 3.5.
Oh boy.
Maybe.
So I think that we started with D&D 3.5, moved to Pathfinder, and then we all moved to a heavily modified version of Pathfinder, which is where Daniel got brought in. So that's kind of like the timeline of the friend group in terms of like who was involved. But yeah, Daniel's a latecomer, as we found out in the sex cult. But yeah, I don't think that we've played like a D&D or a Pathfinder derivative as like a whole group since, oh God, 3 years ago now. I've
three. I think 3.
I want to say 3. Yeah.
I've basically not moved on from my weird narrative story games. Right now, we literally just started a game last night, which is a City of Mist hack, and we've played Dungeon World, and we've played all sorts of weirdo one shots as well. We've played a Cypher system game. it's mostly me just trying to find out what system I like best, and one that doesn't require a whole lot of mechanics and crunch, because I mean, we came from 3.5 and Pathfinder, which are very crunchy systems. And while fun, like it gives you a lot of like power when you learn how to min-max correctly. To me, I thought that there was a lot of narrative aspects missing in the game, which is why I've kind of transitioned away from that.
And
It's
Daniel's
funny.
also been working on his OSR Plus system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. We do have to plug actually, we can't plug it yet because it's not ready for public consumption.
Coming
but Daniel
soon.
has been working on a web. Daniel, why don't you explain it? Because I'm going to fuck it up.
Well, I was gonna say like it's funny because the first time I played anything adjacent to third edition, it's like Pathfinder, was when I started playing with you guys, because before that I hadn't played for at least like, I don't know, 8 years or 10 years when I was in Florida, because we used to play like second edition way back then. So like it was my first experience playing third was with you guys when we played Pathfinder. But I guess you could consider Pathfinder basically third edition. But
It's
evolved,
3.75, yeah.
Right.
It's very close. Yeah.
So that was like an experience because I hadn't, I mean, granted, second edition had, your character sheets are also 17 pages long, but I was shocked because I stupidly chose like a monk for my first character in Pathfinder. And I had to have a separate sheet just to understand the way the attacks work. So talk about mechanics.
You had a flow chart. I remember like you printed out like, okay, if I attack and this hits, then I go here. But if it doesn't, then it goes here.
Right.
Was your monk before your gunslinger, or do you
always
do that?
It was before.
And then create characters.
I stupidly chose a gunslinger. But the reason why I said that is because like then Rob had played some narrative like PBTA based games, which I didn't know that's what that was at the time because I'd never heard of that. And so then I started to do my own research because I thought, everyone has their own homebrew system, but I wanted to have a system that was somewhere between PBTA and old school, like second edition sort of stuff. So that's why I started working on my own. But it's great. It was great going from the super mechanical Pathfinder to something like we tried Dungeon World, right? As one of the ones we tried early on. To see, what's the gray space between those two, and it's super fun. I feel like
I'd say that your system feels like a very heroic version of an OSR thing. Because to me, right, like when I think OSR, I think like hyper deadly,
hyper death,
like you're just gonna get like tossed through the meat grinder, and yours is like, no, we're gonna play like D&D 5e, but with like a 2d6 die mechanic, like
exactly.
That's how it feels.
It tries to marry like some of the PBTA stylings with the old school, what you're used to seeing in an old school game.
Oh, we can cut this if we don't want, but we recently have been playing a one shot that turned into a 3-shot from based on the battle trains setting that we've done with like the crash landers, where we're all essentially press ganged into attacking a train, but by being like the Electro Vikings and shit like that. And we just had the second session happen recently, and oh man, that system allows for some wild things to happen. Let me just put it that way.
We'll send that one out eventually once we got it recorded.
Actually, we can probably send that out and because we have recorded the sessions and everything, but they're not edited and ready for public consumption. But if you guys want to see that, please let us know. Send us a Discord message or an email or something like that, if that's something that, because it's already out. It's already done. It's a matter of
and I promise once OSR Plus is ready to be released, you guys will be the first that we'll send a link to, because I want to make I want to take a lot of the settings we made in the podcast and render them in the system so they're playable.
Yes. And I think that the ease of use with that system is quite nice. The only thing I'd probably argue for is you would want to have something that helps GMs a little bit more, but we can talk about that.
I want to write a book for that. Specifically.
Well,
that's my plan.
If you want a book, just fucking write it on the website,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. We've got another one from Jay has a good one, actually. He wants to know, just like we ask people during the rapid fire questions, what is your favorite character death that you've seen or played in the game? So I Go ahead. And someone take that one from me. I'll go later. Daniel, why don't you start us off? What's your favorite? Daniel, what is your favorite player death that you've seen or played?
Or that I've experienced?
Yes.
Trying to think back to, so like the GM that I played under when I was like a teenager, who is still to this day is like a legendary GM in my mind. And I don't know if that's partly because of him being the first GM or nostalgia, or if he actually was awesome. But anyway, I'm trying to remember. I think I played a murderous. Well, she was like a hyper feminist, murderous Harlequin sort of character. It was
so like
medieval...
Harley Quinn plus basically.
Yeah,
Harley Quinn or Harlequin?
Harlequin. So like the lyre pipes, and
Okay,
gesture.
gotcha.
And she, I remember there was like Skeletor was in this campaign somehow, and
Makes sense.
she was like in the position of a sorceress, and I think she had to do something to like help the protagonist win, and it involved like her sacrificing herself. So that one was really fun just from a narrative perspective, because I had to choose to die in order to help the protagonist, who was another player, really defeat the big bad guy.
It sounds to me, when you throw in Skeletor, it sounds like you're not role playing at all, but like mashing action figures together.
You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty dope. That's a cool one. Let me ask you this: why does it stick out to you so much? Just because it was like, was that like the first time that you were like, oh shit, narrative stuff matters and I have control over my character?
Yeah, I mean, I really liked the first time being able to choose, the character's destiny, and for that to make a huge difference in the story, because I didn't have to do that, but I thought it made sense in the moment. And so it like really, it was one of those moments when you do something in a role-playing game and the whole table is like, oh, that's awesome, that makes perfect sense, and it has to happen that way because it makes sense for the narrative.
Courtney or Chris?
Mine does not count fully as a death, but I thought they were dead.
So okay.
I feel like that should count. I even came prepared with a new character.
Go on.
I was playing a completely legitimately good character, and
okay, I have to stop you immediately because I'm already suspicious. Like, was this okay?
This was Julian.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
No, Julian is not a good character.
Julian is like,
absolutely
from his perspective, you're the evil character.
God.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Julian is literally just like, he's basically the level of evil that is like pure. He's basically Christian Bale from American Psycho. He's Patrick Bateman, 100%.
That would be your opinion.
Wow.
But anyhow, after fighting off a bunch of what was it? Insect Lady and Golden Knights, and
oh yeah.
He unjustly had been burdened with a curse that every time he harms a living being, he himself would be harmed in increasing amounts. And in defense of the other people, selflessly, he took down the knight and succumbed to his wounds. And I thought that the other people, quote unquote good people, were going to kill him in his sleep.
I actually totally forgot about that aspect of it, but there was a legitimate moment where they're all standing around your unconscious body thinking, is this how we do it?
Yeah.
It's like, he's finally, like, he can't defend himself. This is the weakest he may ever be. And because my guy was also a beast.
I mean, well, he was an alchemist who would turn himself into a literal beast. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good one. I remember that.
And I remember I created Rebecca Day, the greatest character.
You really thought you were gonna die. Yeah. Oh man, you rolled so well in those stats.
I rolled like 3 18s, and it was in front of you.
Yeah, it was an absurd stat line. It's like,
did you ever get to play that character?
No, but it was
what
funny because Rebecca Day was also his arch nemesis.
Yes,
wow.
Exactly right.
That would have been
who was just a very nice lady who baked cookies for people at the office, kind of thing.
And because he's a literal and figurative monster, he's like, I must kill. She's awful, and I must kill her. I mean, there was a lot of complicated feelings that Julian had for Rebecca, if I remember correctly. But
Well,
Mm.
yes, yeah, it got yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
All right.
But my favorite thing about that character was also the love of their cat.
Yes, yeah, that's the only thing that was like remotely redeemable.
Oh
about
yeah,
that character.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh no, and his ward, who later came about, Joffrey.
Aw,
Mm.
Joffrey.
Yeah, good old Joffrey. He did take in a burnt and scarred orphan
Body.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean person, boy.
Yes. Anyway,
I played with that character. I remember that.
You sure did.
Yeah.
And I think that I'm not
Totally
sure.
a person.
Yeah, totally a person. Like Chris and I were talking out at like during the middle of the campaign. There was a time jump that happened, and during that time jump, Chris just so happened to be like, "Hey, let's talk about stuff that happened." And he was being an alchemist. He created a tumor familiar, which I was like, that should totally be like a ward or like a little character, a side character. And Joffrey became like an actual character later on. So
Yes.
this like weird tumor child that Julian like created in a vat basically and gave a tragic backstory to later ended up being like a real character in our game.
He actually did have a few moments in the original campaign because it was
He
just
did.
like where it was just like, hey, could you pour some drinks for our guests? It was just like, why do you have a child?
Yes, yeah.
I own an orphanage now. Don't
Oh,
question it.
And like everyone was immediately suspicious of this child, but not of it being a weird tumor homunculus.
More of it just like, is he experimenting on you?
Yeah.
Is he like, is there some vivisection going on every now and then?
Exactly. Yeah, they were like all
Mr.
terribly
Julian
concerned.
is oh so kind to me.
Yeah, they were all terribly concerned for this child that wasn't even an actual child. It was actually really well done and funny. Especially because Chris and I were like tittering to each other out of game, like, oh, he's not even a person, and we've got them all fooled, you know, like dumb.
Don't treat him like a person.
Yeah, because he's not. It's like everyone just assumed it was Chris's character being like a monster, but in fact, he was actually just a tumor.
I don't think I knew that actually.
You didn't?
I don't
I
think
thought
so.
we talked about that at some
my
point.
God.
I don't
Yeah, no, Joffrey
know.
was literally Julian's tumor.
Yeah, he was a tumor homunculus that he
Wow.
created. Yeah. And we just
And-
so happened to give him sentience, and he became a playable character later on. So remember.
And that's why Joffrey was terrified of Julian in the second
Yes.
campaign, because he was just like, what if he wants to absorb me back
Oh.
into
Yeah.
his body?
Yeah. Remember, don't let your dreams be dreams. Even tumors can become real boys at some point. So, you know, with enough alchemical magic. And
Do
all that
tumors dream of flesh sheep?
stuff. No. Stop it. Courtney, why don't you tell us about
Yes.
your favorite character death?
I guess I kind of have two, but one isn't really a death. And I'll start
Go
with
on.
that one. I guess it was Death of a Campaign.
Ooh.
That was a campaign that you ran, Rob, where we were in this kind of like creepy horror wilderness setting, and it was just a very emotional campaign, emotionally draining. And in kind of, I forget if it was the very last session or the
It
one leading up
was.
to it, my character kind of stepped in and took a blow from an enemy that was meant for a character who may have been his daughter. Um, and that wound ended up becoming horribly infected, and basically the the final session ended with his leg being amputated and
Poorly. Yeah.
And we hadn't even like meant to end the campaign there, but after that it was like, yep, we're good. This is a good stopping point.
Yeah, that was a very emotional campaign overall.
Extremely.
It was
Yeah.
a very bleak setting,
Mhm.
and it was like it was my first time really DMing a like a horror campaign, and I was just like, it was just bleak thing after bleak thing after bleak thing. And I realized after the fact that I'm like, man, they need some levity because otherwise
Yeah.
everyone gets super depressed.
That is
Although,
accurate.
yeah, that was like the last session of the campaign. I'm actually glad that we stopped it there.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
It was
It
also,
was a
I'm like,
good
yeah,
edit.
you
Mhm,
can't. I
mhm.
mean, it was like really tense roles of like Courtney's character also just so happened to be the healer.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so, with the healer incapacitated, there's an entire party of people who are trying to stop them from bleeding to death from a failed, or not a failed, but like a botched amputation of the
Mhm.
limb. And it's like dice being rolled and like very intense. And it was very good. Yeah, it was.
I would literally play that setting again as different characters.
Oh yeah, I mean that the Stalwick campaign, I had it mapped out better than any other campaign that I've ever mapped out before, and also some of those beats. I mean, the way that you play it could change entirely depending on how you like what you do and how it happens. It's, oh man,
Mm.
there's a ton of really good stuff in Stalwick that I really liked.
On a much more light note, this is also kind of a wilderness campaign that you
Oh, you're
run,
gonna talk
Rob,
about
and yeah,
Teak, aren't you?
yeah.
Yeah,
So
Oh,
Rob
yeah.
ran this wilderness, like kind of edge of wilderness exploration swamp campaign, and obviously the entire party decided to play like urban city folk with no survival skills at all, because
hey,
that's what you do
my
in
guy was a
in a,
survivor.
I told them, all right, everyone, this is basically a Wild West boom town, but in the swamp. So get
yep.
ready. And they're like, we're all urbane, like we have no
Aristocrats.
survival. Yeah, exactly. Like you're pseudo aristocrats,
Wait,
like straight up city folk.
didn't
Mhm.
Tyler literally have a manservant?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
he
yes,
did.
he did.
And he was a
Sebastian.
godsend.
Hmm.
Yes.
Oh, we
Yeah.
Yep.
needed him.
Yeah. So very first session we were, was it, or yeah, I think it was first session. We were in a wagon. We had been kind of captured and we were tied up, if I recall
Yeah,
correctly.
you got drugged by some
Yeah.
food. Yeah.
And so we like kind of come to, and the wagon actually crashes and breaks apart. And um so we're all like tied up and we have to escape the broken wagon, which is actually sinking into this like muddy quicksand kind of stuff. And we're all these weak, urbane, aristocratic people. And somehow all of us managed to roll super well and like pull ourselves out and survive,
Until
except for poor Teak, um, who we did, in fairness, we did actually try to save him a couple times, but we just like couldn't. So
Because our
towards the
highest strength stat was 12.
shh,
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
no, that wasn't the problem. It was Teak got knocked out because he
yeah,
was basically he mouthed off to the guard who like headbutted him or
mm,
like struck him with the butt of a crossbow.
yeah,
And it just so happened that the 2 points of like non-lethal damage that he took were just enough after the impact of crashing into the swamp to like entirely knock him out.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so
So
like
yeah, we escaped and just kind of stood there and watched the wagon go down. Like, well, nothing we could have done.
what I actually really liked about that moment is that Tyler's character like had Teak on his shoulder, rolled
Mm,
twice as this carriage is being sucked into the mud, and like rolled terribly, and then he says, "Fuck it, I'm dropping Teak."
yep.
And he drops him over the shoulder to be sucked into the swamp and dead forever. And at that moment, that's when he rolls a like nat 20 or some shit like that. And just immediately jumps out. Like it's just like, oh, guess he was weighing me down this entire time. Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was also this was like hour 1 of a 3 to 4 hour session. And so like I had
Mm,
a player who's just sitting there like, well, I don't know what to do for the next 3 to 4 hours. Guess I'm just gonna sit here and do nothing. uh it was very memorable, but also very unfortunate. So
yes,
I
extremely.
I could have sworn from memory that Teak lived or was awake long enough to help boost someone up or to break their restraints, and instead of going like, okay, now break mine, someone was just like, fuck that, I'm out.
that sounds like something that's plausible because
Yeah, it does.
as the carriage got further into the mud, it did start to constrict, and like basically shards of wood started to fly and hit people. So I wouldn't be surprised if that in fact happened to Teak as well, and that like he was,
Mm,
I'm gonna be the one good character, and then immediately just fucking ate it. And that actually set the tone of the campaign as well, because it's like, oh, this is the character that's supposed to be the heart of the party, and then that party member fucking dies. So it's like, yeah, no, you're done. Oh man. Yeah. So I will say that the only time I've ever died as a character is during one of Chris's games.
Oh God, why do you?
And I mean, it's fine. I'm not going to bring that part up, Chris. Don't worry. But I actually really liked this character. I had a lot of really cool moments. It was a paladin, and people thought that he was like suicidal because of the stuff that he did, but he was actually just like, I was really trying to play lawful good and like send a message and be a beacon of good to the world. And then eventually, after some, basically me ended up 1v1ing, or at least that's kind of the situation that happened, almost 1v1ing like the main bad guy. He just rolled a lucky crit and like just annihilated me. The only thing is, I always remember that because one, it's the only time I've ever died as a character, and two, I remember being really pissed about it forever. Because I was like, I didn't even get a fucking like death speech as I died, man. It was like, I think everyone around the table was so shocked that it happened that we were all like, oh shit. And then we kind of forgot about the fact that he died, which was unfortunate. It was also crazy because it was a paladin with a constitution of 20, which means that like I had crazy, stupid, dumb amounts of hit points and the ability to like basically bring myself back from the dead. But yeah, it was just one of those moments that will stick with me because I was like, yeah, that's dope as fuck. Yeah, those are all the deaths. Let's see what we got next. C.R. Rowanson asks us, what are some common tropes in world building you like to see less of? Not counting stock fantasy races, so he cut me off at the pass there. What are some trends you're seeing in world building, and are there any you really enjoy?
Obviously the one I think is extremely tired, and I won't read it if that's the premise unless there's some twist, is the chosen one trope. Like there's
oh god, is that still a thing even?
Yeah. I mean in YA it's
totally,
a frequent thing, but it's just like there's nothing new you can tell me about that unless you're doing something really unusual and subverting with the chosen one trope.
I feel like even the chosen one of evil is a thing that's probably been done by now, right? Where it's like you're the chosen one, but you're chosen to destroy the world, that type of thing. That's got to have been a thing already, right?
Any sort of like that's genetic exceptionalism, it's just not interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that aspect of it for sure.
Genetic exceptionalism?
Well, that's what the chosen one usually is. Like I'm either chosen by a god or I'm just like naturally a badass.
Gifted at everything.
Right. Yeah. It's like 95% of shonen anime and like shonen manga is like even something like Naruto, right? Where it's like, I'm going to outwork you. And it's like, no, you're actually just blessed with a specific bloodline. There's like a weird like eugenics thing that happens with a lot of like manga and anime that I'm just like recognizing as an adult and being like, that's really weird. All of your powers tend to derive not from you being smarter or working hard, but you're like, I just have superior genetics. Like I can cast this magical ability because my line of forefathers, like look at fucking Goku, look at Naruto, look at like pretty much anyone.
My Hero Academia has that going on pretty hard. No one talks about it, but it's most certainly there.
I mean, it's like a weird like subtextual thing a lot of the time. Even like One Piece. I thought One Piece would be like kind of bucking that trend until you find out much later into the series that spoilers that I'm not going to get into. Exactly. There's all sorts of nonsense that happens there. I'm not going to get into it further, but yeah.
Well, and to be fair, like a lot of what we see, at least in entertainment through movies and on television, that's like several years, if not almost half a decade behind what's being printed, like in publishing. But so even in that, we're seeing, say, the latest Star Wars movies, right? It's still genetic exceptionalism is what they're dealing with. They're not really showing us anything new.
Yeah.
Palpatine blood.
God damn it.
I can hear him seething.
Daniel has muted himself. Yeah,
exactly. Can't with that movie. I just can't do that. Can't go
There'll be a
I
he
mean,
muted
okay,
himself. He's
even
gonna.
I mean, even and granted, that kind of trope is seductive, right? Like Harry Potter is
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
the modern fantasy of our time, right? YA fantasy of our time, and it relies on that same trope, right?
Sure. I mean, you're the chosen one, and I mean, I think it's popular for a reason because I think there's an innate need for everyone in existence to feel special in some way, and
Hmm.
because fantasy and sci-fi is often wish fulfillment, that's where it really gets, like expressed a lot.
I
It's a
think I
matter.
think it's just on your point. Like I think there was this one. I think it's Kurt Vonnegut. He had written an alternative Jesus Christ story where instead of God making Christ of his own blood in this parable, God chooses a random hobo to be Christ, to be sacrificed for the sins of humanity. And I'm like, that's a more interesting story to me.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
Hmm.
I'm not necessarily a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, but I can always respect him as a writer. I have weird things about Vonnegut. I've tried to get into his stuff, I just never could.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Looping back to like the chosen one kind of trope, I think that's why the Earthsea books stood out to me so much and appealed to me so much because I feel like they could have easily gone in that direction of like
Mm-hmm.
Sparrowhawk is like this unstoppable magic user and like can do whatever he wants, but like right away there are consequences to his actions and he fucks things up and he has to
Mm-hmm.
make amends and sacrifices, and it's really interesting to kind of follow him through the books because it's not just a like one-sided like, oh, I'm a really powerful mage. It's I'm a really powerful mage, but I messed up here and I like screwed this up and I hurt these people and
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one aspect of writing and world building, and especially RPG, is that like rarely gets explored is the consequences to your
Mm,
motherfucking actions. Like
yeah.
I feel like there there's something, and this is actually something that I would like to see more of. To kind of go back to the question, is books that are set in fantastical settings that have nothing to do with war or like
Hmm.
a magical like chosen one type narrative where it's like this is the world picking up the pieces, like where there's a lot of implications to otherwise world breaking events that are never written about. And it's about the smaller stories that happen within. I
Hmm.
think that there's a lot of opportunities that you could tell really beautiful, human, interesting, weird stories that happen within those types of settings.
Yeah, totally agreed.
Hmm. Do we have any other tropes that we're sick of, Chris?
I have a trope, but I don't think it's a modern trend one. It's just one that's very hard for people to seem to move away from. Uh, Monolithic cultures
Mm,
in
Mm,
anything sci-fi, where it's the person that you meet from this culture is literally every person from that
mm.
culture you will then meet from there on. And if you meet anyone who goes against that, they are instantly the most outcasted
Heretic,
yeah,
yeah.
heretic, the
mhm,
exact opposite. It's not like, no, that's just like the one thing that I really liked about well, I liked many things about it, but in The Mandalorian, how when he met other Mandalorian people, they were like, "Oh, he's one of those people. He's like the really traditional type." And
Yeah.
that was the
mhm.
only thing that was touched upon it. It
Yeah,
wasn't like, "How dare you? You never take off your helmet." It was just like, "Oh, all right, moving on."
Mhm,
yeah, completely agreed there. I think that there's also a trope within sci-fi as well where it's like what are they called? They're like monobiomes or something like that, where it's like there's
This
the
is the
ice
jungle
planet.
planet, the ice
Right,
planet.
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
that's always frustrating, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like, well, why is your world like that? Like, tell
Yeah,
us about that. Like that type of thing. That's another trope that also can go fuck off and die. I agree.
yeah, and I feel like that also ties in with, like, the whole idea of consequences or implications, like, you can't just
Mm,
have, like, "Oh, here's a jungle planet," but also, like, otherwise the culture is exactly like, humans on Earth, like, it wouldn't
oh yeah.
develop like that, there would be totally different technology, totally different, ways of living, cultures, everything.
Why do the Ferengi not care more about water or see jungle and swamp and everything as being a little bit more important? How did they get to be hyper capitalist?
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is a thing that I've been talking about literally since episode 3, where if you're going to be doing different like fantasy or sci-fi races or species, depending on how you want to describe them, uh, make sure that you follow all the way through with the implications, and don't just make them humans. You know, like that's my biggest issue, my biggest point when it comes to that type of trope. But I promised Clark I wouldn't go on this rant again, so that
Did we
yeah,
talk
that's it.
about economics that we're talking about right now, or no?
No, we're
Oh,
talking about like the implications of like monobiome like planets and
oh,
Mhm.
stuff like that. So like this is ice planet, jungle
oh,
planet,
yeah.
desert planet, like dumb bullshit like that needs to
Yeah,
fuck off and
which
die.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to see is science fiction. I mean, this is being done, but I'm just saying I would like to see it more, especially in the big screen. Is science fiction that pays a lot of attention to its economic basis. So,
Mm.
like, if
Mhm.
you have a utopia, like, what was the path that achieved that, and what is their economic situation? Right. So like even something like Star Trek, they don't want to talk about that because they have an explanation, but it's just not what they're really interested in. But I would love to see like, okay, like what's the economic underpinnings of if you have a system where people travel faster than light, like how do things work like that? Or if they don't, like how do you move supplies back and forth? Like what's the economy like? And I think that there's
Mhm.
a lot of
Mm.
weird stuff that comes out of when you start answering those questions.
Well, yeah, like if you take a closer look, to go back to what I was saying about the Ferengi, they have replicators, so literally the only thing of value would be ideas. So why aren't they
Mhm.
like spear fronting technological advancement?
Right. Yeah. So it's like, oh, when you have no longer a need for worrying about scarcity, like, well, what's the concern?
Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Unless it's plated latinum,
Right.
that can't replicate that.
And this isn't to say like this stuff is being explored. I think in at the forefront of like sci-fi, like in writing. It's just that we're not seeing we don't get to see those things on the big screen until like 5 to 10 years later, which is the sucky part.
Mhm.
This actually ties into another one of our patron questions. We're inadvertently answering this, which is Seth asks us, what is your favorite oft overlooked bit of world building and who does it best in your opinion?
Ooh.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can go pretty quickly and easily. I think that the reason I like China Meeville stuff as much as I
Mhm.
do is that it focuses on exactly what I was interested in, I was talking about previously, where it doesn't focus on the adventuring party. It focuses on regular people in fantastical settings. So one of the things that I really like in Meeville's Perdido Street Station is there's a great scene where they explore like a slaughterhouse, and I think that aspect of it is really fascinating, and I love not just seeing the slaughterhouse itself, but focusing on the working class people and
Mhm.
focusing on like, hey, these are how dangerous dissident ideas get put down. Like that's the really interesting thing. And also, if you haven't read Pretty to Street Station, dear God, I've been talking about this book for nearly 100 episodes. It's so good.
So good.
uh, I agree that, or rather, I would suggest that China Meeville does stuff like that really, really well. Not just in his Boss Log stuff, but his more sci-fi ventures as well.
Yeah, totally. I was also thinking of him in that he has these characters who are just not like the typical fantasy warrior types. Like
Oh
in
yeah.
Pretty Street Station, one of them's the scientist, academic kind of guy, and one's an artist, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
journalist. It's like not what you typically see. And
Yeah.
he also really, really does well with the idea of consequences that we were talking about
Oh
before,
yeah.
where um, something that
Morally
might,
difficult choices as
oh
well.
yeah,
Oh
yeah,
man.
yeah,
Yeah. I think we had a good conversation about like the ending of that book, and like Isaac's kind of a piece of shit, and I think
yeah.
that's another thing I appreciate about his writing is that he's not afraid to write unlikable characters as like
Hmm.
fairly major characters.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm. Does anyone else want to talk about the oft overlooked aspects of world building?
I was going to say the thing that often is overlooked is how do people eat and what do
Hmm.
they do with their day-to-day lives? Like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
a lot of people seem to overlook the industry and like why was this town set up? Why here? Because often you'll just try and do what a lot of fantasy does, where it's just like, oh, there's a waterfall here, that's cool, and then
Yeah.
the town is built around that waterfall, and then it's just like, well, why did they all go? There's not like, go a little bit further. Say that there's fish or something at least.
It's kind of like what Daniel was saying, where you want economic consequences or at least justifications for the world building decisions that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah, just like a sort of attention, at least, to like the mundane tasks that need to take place to build these things up,
Hmm.
and all the things that sort of exist in cultures that don't involve heroic acts, like artists and authors and musicians. I feel like they tend to often be overlooked in like fantasy sci-fi settings.
Hard agree.
One thing, and I wouldn't say it's necessarily overlooked, but it's not usually thought of as part of world building. Like, we usually think of what are all the things we're going to put in this world, when we're doing world building. But when you're actually doing the act of writing something using your world building, there's the craft involved, right? And so, to me, I think what's really important and what makes a difference between, say, your average piece of speculative fiction and something that can be great and be in like an anthology is the language. And by that I mean specifically like how do you unify all the elements you've come up with in your setting, in your story through the language itself. And so, there's your classic examples of writers who do that, like William Gibson, for example, obviously is one who, you know 40 years ago is the type of person who takes specific words and starts to make them evocative based on how he's chosen to name things and how
Hmm.
everything kind of adds up to the same economy of language. um and I think if you can do that, then you don't actually have to do as much world building on paper, because the reader is going to start imagining the things you're
Mm.
creating based on how you've named them.
Hmm.
um
Yes.
the culture series, I think, is one that does that a lot, by giving you really interesting names for things in order to get you to start thinking about what does that actually mean for the world, without you having to actually spend hundreds of pages documenting, at least in your head for your own sake, what do those things mean.
Hmm.
Yeah, or sometimes documenting them to the readers as like an info dump, which
Yes,
I
which you
always just
absolutely
like
do a
Yes.
pulls
lot.
me right out of the story. Like, I
Yeah.
don't feel like reading in a textbook right now. I just want to
Yeah.
follow these
Mhm.
characters.
To expand upon that with the language, I do love when you see in a book, a game, or anything, the two different levels of language, where you will have like the more educated words for things, and then the more common or street language of, like, instead of people saying organic, they'll say ganic or something like that.
Yeah, you're talking about like colloquial language, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to like the fundamental Tolkien basis for all of this is like the language is at the spine of this whole thing. Like, the vast majority of his world building was based on language, and whatever we say about Tolkien's actual writing, like, the language is how he started building everything, because he was a linguist. And I mean, and the reason why I focus on this is because my background, like, academically, was in poetry first. Like,
Mm.
that's what my minor was, and I had a lot of workshops for that in my undergrad. So it's like I'm always thinking about, well, what are the actual words on the page going to do
Right.
aside from the plot?
I think I've actually been thinking about this aspect of world building a lot recently, and I've kind of come up with like a shorthand version or a shorthand name for it, which is the implication, right? Like, what's the implication of your words and your worlds and aspects that lead to the person who's engaged with the text asking a million more questions, or on the inverse, perhaps inferring a million different details and bits of information, right? Like, by adding small details and allowing the implication to happen, it's a matter of, oh, well, now I know this and this about the world just based on one small detail. I think that that's really important.
Hmm.
Let's move on to Jacob, who wants to know what is usually left half baked in a world that you really want to see more well developed. I feel like that's kind of been talked about a little bit, but we
Hmm.
can go a little bit deeper into that if you want. I think we owe it.
A lot of time, religion.
Ooh,
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah, that's
Even
not a bad idea.
like the one thing about fantasy, a lot of time when it's 100% that not only does your god exist, but so does the other guy, there's no like acceptance of the fact of your god does exist. My god's just better than your god. It very rarely will it become like a philosophical debate of which, like, the reason you follow your god. It's just more of, nope, this is my god,
Hmm.
even though you have proof that other gods exist, which should allow you to question it or kind of nitpick which one you want to follow.
Yeah.
For me, it's definitely magic. And I know that sounds weird considering like how overly done magic and how overly explained some magic systems are. But what I mean by this is the implication. You know, like when you have certain types of magic, you also, I feel like people think about cool magic systems and then and don't often stop to think about the implication of what those systems actually mean in the greater sense of the word. I'm just going to take a generic, like, let's think about the Forgotten Realms and let's think about like a generic D&D fantasy setting where when you have access to a bunch of all of these spells or a bunch of all of these magical abilities, you still see like farmers and serfdom and a lot of that same kind of power dynamic that we're used to in our world, where you're not thinking about the idea that, well, necromancers can raise dead and use them as workers, or you can give miners ant strength and suddenly you don't need nearly as many miners, or like there's a level of societal disruption that happens when you introduce magic into a lot of these
Hmm.
worlds that just doesn't get explored. Like people are always trying to create the coolest magic system for
Why are
the
the weakest of this
adventuring
poor?
party,
Mm.
but not to think about how it would be used on a commercial or on a personal basis.
Yeah, it's almost like they take a world without magic and then just like drop some magic on top, but don't actually change any of what's underneath.
Yes. Yeah, I
And
feel like that's
yeah,
probably a big opportunity for sure.
yeah, like
And
even thinking about healing spells in like role playing games and fantasy settings, it's like if you can just heal somebody's broken limb, like why are all these other people suffering? Or if you can resurrect
mm,
people, like what implications would that have for a
oh,
civilization?
absolutely. I mean, I think that if we were to extrapolate it in terms of a like societal sense, it would certainly mean that richer people essentially become immortal or at least having a
Mm,
greatly expanded lifespan compared to the poor, which I would imagine would lead to some kind of a class divide much stronger than what we see in traditional fiction.
hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
You touched on the whole magic thing, I kind of said, I don't get how often there are poor people and then people running around with items that could fix
Yeah.
entire nations' problems.
Yeah, or it's like one adventurer has several decades worth of work for a day laborer on them at any time. Like
Mhm.
that
Mm,
is, I mean, the more that I think about it, especially the economics of like D&D, it's weirdly like supremely classist in a lot of ways. And like
yeah.
you're literally playing the 1%, and it's like kind of gross in some ways, or it's like I guess this is what inherent superpowers look like. And like, meanwhile, you could probably do a lot more good than fighting off a goblin or like a horde of goblins than like, hey, I'm just going to sell my staff and like now I'm going to greatly improve this area as a result.
Yeah, it's like Jeff Bezos is like the level 20 wizard who isn't gonna help anybody.
He's just
Just
about to
hoarding
cast
everything.
planar transition as he fucking flies to Mars. So yeah,
Have you signed that he should not be allowed to return?
I have not.
I
Uh,
have not. No,
yeah.
no.
I guess it really depends on the particular piece, right? So it's hard for
Yes.
me to say what's half baked overall
Mhm,
across like what's I mean, what does that mean like what's currently being published? What do we see in movies? I think like on a case by case basis, you might find like if a story is interested in say I don't know like empire building, right? And they don't really have a political system expressed in the story, that would
Mm-hmm.
be half baked, right? But if they don't have I don't know a heavy religious system explained and there's not really religion isn't part of the story, I could see that as being fine. But it really depends on the story, like whatever their main goal thematically is, like hopefully they fleshed out the world building for that thing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean that's a very valid point. Like I think that what we're looking at here is what allegory are you really seeking out in your fiction? Like what do you want to look at? Oh, I want to see more. Like I want to see more commentary on colonialism as it happens. Like that type of thing. I watched a really great video essay recently on War of the Worlds and the alien invasion as colonialism, and I was like, oh, I'm really dumb and never thought of alien invasions as an extension of colonialism before. And it was actually really intriguing to kind of think about it that way. And we have another question from Jacob, who wants to know, at what point is cereal considered a stew? Chris, you can start us off with this one.
Okay, I'm going to ignore that and go for the Food Lovers Compendium. It states that cereal has to be a grain-based product.
Oh,
Okay,
that
so
sounds right to me.
Mhm. I mean, cereal grains is a term.
Yeah.
So
I
it
was
makes
going to
sense.
say you're
Makes sense,
probably
yeah.
looking at cereal the grain, not necessarily like
No, it says cereal, and it is named after, I believe, the ancient Roman god for agriculture, which means it has to be
A series?
it is something of a grain that is grown and processed that makes it cereal.
This is going to be the next hour of the podcast, by the way. So if you
Yeah.
want to
Die upon this hill, goddammit.
Yeah. So Courtney, why don't you tell us, when does cereal become a stew?
Son of a bitch.
I do not think that cereal is a super stew.
Okay.
I think there's
Daniel?
a division.
Thank you,
Yep.
Courtney.
I guess when you start to boil it, like
Oh, interesting. See,
So would like oatmeal be a stew then?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually
No,
not a bad idea.
oatmeal is just
No,
a cereal.
God damn it. Okay, so my view on it is like you wouldn't. So if somebody asked you like, "Hey, what'd you have for breakfast?" and you said, "I had a stew," they wouldn't be like, "Oh, you had a bowl of like whatever cereal." They would picture an actual like beef stew or something, because that's just not the common meaning of the word and how it's used in.
In common parlance, when you
Yes.
say cereal, you
Oh.
mean something
So-
like Cheerios.
Exactly.
To
Yes.
Courtney's point, a stew is specifically a dish of meat and vegetables that's cooked
Yeah.
slowly.
So
Mm.
right.
So,
So
no,
actually,
it's not ever a stew.
my answer to that
When
question,
you add meat and vegetables, then it'll be a stew.
right? Well, there's an argument to be made that the cereal itself is in fact a vegetable. Our grains are basically vegetables, right?
No.
I fucking hate you.
Chris is gonna murder you.
Anyway, I would say that when you have, I would say it becomes a stew as soon as you add meat to it. So the next time you're sitting down and you have some cinnamon toast crunch and you like have some chopped up cubes of steak or something to it, guess what? You got yourself a stew.
Why? Okay, wait. One other thing.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Is a hot dog a sandwich?
No. For the same reason.
Quick on
If somebody asked you what'd you have for lunch and you said a sandwich, they wouldn't be like, "Oh, hot dog, clearly." Like that's what you mean.
Question.
It's just not in the same.
But then what is a
category.
hot dog?
Question. What if someone said a hot dog sandwich?
I've had those. It's when I don't
Yeah.
have any hot dog buns.
And you cut it like
Yeah.
in half and that, yeah.
No, I just leave my hot dogs whole as I eat them with my toast. I cry.
I don't know why. I just immediately pictured you swallowing hot dogs whole.
I mean, as long as it's not with ketchup.
Yeah, Chris is one of those weird people who don't think that hot dogs and ketchup go together, which
I
is like
can't
just
do it.
Ketchup is great
okay.
on hot
Chris
dogs.
is the type of person who is like, soup is not a cereal, or cereal is not a soup, but then it's like hot dogs and ketchup don't mix. Like,
No, I
What?
respect.
What?
If you want to put ketchup on yours, don't put ketchup on mine. That is
Chris, what do you put ketchup on?
fries.
Okay, that's.
I feel
an-
like that was a word association for a moment. I didn't like. There was no cognizant thought there. It was just like fries.
Gotcha.
Ooh, eggs. Even though I'm told they don't
Eggs?
do that in the South.
What?
Yeah,
Why would you
scrambled-
put ketchup and eggs? That
Scrambled
sounds
eggs.
terrible.
Yeah, scrambled eggs.
No.
With- yeah.
Yeah, we do
Yeah.
that all the time in the South.
No,
Totally normal.
absolutely not. Hot sauce
Tastes just
maybe
fine.
on eggs. Hot sauce
Wait,
on
wait.
eggs.
I used to
Chris,
do
have
ketchup and eggs. Yeah.
Chris, have you ever cut up hot dogs into scrambled eggs and had ketchup with it?
No.
Oh my god, what is this? What is this podcast and what are you fucking talking about, Courtney?
But I have had hot dogs cut up into my macaroni.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've
Okay,
had too.
okay. All right. So we have roughly 15 minutes left. Daniel, explain why you don't trust burritos.
For the next
Because
15 minutes.
They're completely sealed up, and you don't know what's inside of that until you open it up.
It could be anything. It could be filled with
Right.
bees.
There could be
True.
like grubs in there for all you know.
Mhm.
You're just stupidly biting into it, you know? That's what you
Okay.
get.
But what happens if you either A, make the burrito yourself, or B, watch them make the burrito?
Making the burrito yourself is safer.
No, it's
Watching them make the burrito, you know, you have to trust what you can see.
So Daniel, let me ask you a question. So how do you feel about pies, Daniel? Like specifically pies with a crust on them that you can't see until you cut into them.
Well, when you eat a pie, do you take the entire circular pie and stuff it into your mouth?
Absolutely.
So when you eat a pie, normally you cut a slice open, and so you're using a fork and knife and you're cutting it apart and seeing what's inside of it.
So why don't you just, if you're given a burrito, why can't you cut into it just a little bit to see that it's okay and then, you know, like put it back?
If I have to eat a burrito, in fact, what I do is cut it apart with a fork and knife.
You're a monster. You're an actual fucking monster, Daniel. What is
I'm telling
wrong with you?
But you see, it all makes logical sense.
It doesn't.
My
What?
coworkers once plotted. My coworkers were fascinated because I don't like to touch food. Like I don't want to touch it with my hands. So they once plotted a chart because we were all, they were mostly engineers and we were working at an advertising agency. And they did this we had a whiteboard. So during lunch, they had me answer the question like, would you touch this or would you not? And they plotted it on a chart. And it was the chart they determined had a spectrum from artificial to not artificial. So the more artificial it was, the more likely I was to be able to touch it.
That's fascinating, and I wish
is.
there was a picture of it.
I might actually still have a photo of it somewhere.
Daniel, this
And so I felt justified that there was reason behind my choice.
Okay, so question, Daniel. What happens if you have a burrito with tinfoil around it?
Well, you unwrap it and then you fork and knife it.
No, God. No, I mean, like, would you be okay holding, like, a sandwich in tinfoil?
No.
Why?
It's too thin of a barrier.
Because, well, you mean because in terms of touch or in terms of what's inside of it?
In terms of touch.
In terms of touch, that's fine because there's like a barrier around it.
Oh, man.
Talked more about sandwiches than world building.
That's why do you think I devoted the last 15 minutes to this question? Because it's like, man, we're going deep with the Daniel lore here because like I thought like cereal soup was like a hotly contested debate. No, Daniel's weird food shit is way weirder than cereal being.
Wait, Daniel.
What
about Pop-Tarts?
Pop-Tarts?
Yeah.
So those, like, they're fairly uniform in what they'll contain. Like, There's not surprises in a Pop-Tart. It's just basically goo. So I'm not really worried about that. And also, they're, like, processed food. So they're pretty uniformly created.
So you trust the more it's processed?
Yes.
What about, like, a frozen burrito? Because those are processed.
Oh, no, gross.
Like
what
a frozen
about
meal.
lollipops?
Oh, those are fun. I like that. I mean, they're solid. It's a solid thing. It's like biting into it.
So here's a list of things Daniel will never eat: empanadas,
ravioli.
Oh God, no. Okay,
oh, God.
Here's a list of things Daniel will never eat: empanadas, pastelitos, ravioli, wontons,
pierogi,
pierogi.
Mm-hmm.
Pierogi are so good, though.
I mean, they're all pasta. I don't even like pasta, so there you go.
You're insane.
Daniel, I can't. Oh man.
Okay. I mean, see, what's funny is the hangups people have with food. Like, if it were up to me and I didn't have to do any social eating with anyone, I would honestly only drink Soylent. Honestly.
You're a fucking monster, Daniel.
I would be healthier than everyone else. I would save so much money.
Would
and
you
I'd
be
have so much
healthier
free
than
time.
everybody else?
Actually,
Yes.
there were some
Yes.
links and studies that I saw where it's like mastication actually helps brain development. So
Mm.
you'd have to chew your Soylent, Daniel. I don't know how well
Well,
that would work for you.
You would just
Question
freeze
of-
it slightly.
The question of the relevance of those studies.
Soylent
but-
ice cream, yeah.
The question of the relevance of the studies, but the Soylent itself has extremely perfect nutritional value. Even though they no longer advertise it as a full meal replacement, even though it was originally.
I think because people
wonder
lost
why.
a lot of weight.
Huh.
Some would say a dangerous amount of weight.
It's weird, Daniel, that the thing is not working the way that it's advertised. Anyway, okay, we're gonna conclude Daniel's hot take corner over here. Actually, wait, one more question. I'm sorry. One more question.
Oh boy.
Do you just not eat like fried chicken, like bone-in fried chicken? That's just not something.
Not
you
without
eat?
silverware. Oh god, I'm not touching that. Gross. It's like super greasy. Ooh. Yeah. I can't. I also can't. Like, I don't mind people touching their food, but like when people are like handling ribs or fried chicken, it's revolting. I won't say anything, but it's revolting to me.
So you came to my graduation party, which was literally hot wings galore.
Yep. And I used a plastic fork and knife whole time.
I know you did, but like you sat there
did I
in
not see
abject
that?
horror the
Yes.
entire time.
Silent, abject horror.
Thus concludes Daniel's hot take corner. If you want to find out more weird shit about Daniel, you can always email us over at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com. Realistically, you're probably coming to us for the world building stuff. That's fine too. You can still send that email over there. Alternatively, if you want to find us on Twitter, you can tweet us over at Let's World Build, follow us and stuff like that. You can also join our Discord and ask Daniel directly, what the fuck is wrong with him? Link for that in the description. And of course, you can always be incredibly generous and give us money over on Patreon. Link for that also in the description. So that's been our episode. I'm going to go ahead and give everyone a final say before we send it off. So if you want to say anything now, please do.
I apologize for my comments earlier. I hope those were edited out.
They are. You can ignore that.
Thank you.
I stand by my food choices.
I will
All right.
fight you if you say cereal is a soup. I will find you.
I agree with you.
Yes.
It is not
I
a
will
soup.
meet you by the flagpole.
Frankly, I think that Daniel's takes on food are far more distressing and upsetting than cereal being a soup. I'm willing to, go there. But this is regarding the podcast. So from me personally, I just want to thank each and every one of our listeners and especially our patrons for supporting us, not just emotionally, spiritually, but also financially. It's one thing to scream into the void. It's another thing to hear a voice back. So thank you for all of your feedback. Thank you for all of your prompts. We've gotten so many really awesome settings and ideas, and we've been able to explore all sorts of different cool, interesting, fun stuff as a result. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, all of you, for listening to us and for being part of this podcast in the community. I can't believe we made it to 100 episodes. I'm really impressed that we even made it past 10, like I said. But anyway, remember that we love you very much. Thank you so much for listening, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.